Hey, welcome. Today we're going to dive into three of the most powerful tools in all of finance: forwards, futures, and options. Now, I know these can sound like a bunch of Wall Street jargon, but trust me, they're not. They're actually the basic building blocks that companies and investors use every single day to manage risk and, find new opportunities. So let's just start with our real-world puzzle. Think about an airline. One of its biggest, if not the biggest cost, is jet fuel. So what happens if that price just skyrockets out of nowhere? I mean, it could literally wipe out their profits for the entire year. How on earth do they protect themselves from that kind of wild, unpredictable risk? Well, that's exactly the problem we're going to solve today. The answer to that airline's big headache lies in a special class of financial tools called derivatives. And they weren't invented in some supercomputer lab. They actually started with something much simpler: farmers trying to lock in a good price for their wheat before it was even harvested. So at their very core, derivatives are just contracts. They're designed to manage the crazy uncertainty of what prices will be in the future. All right, let's jump into our first toolkit. We'll call these the obligation contracts. And really, the name says it all. When you get into one of these, you are obligated to follow through. There's no backing out. You're basically shaking hands on a price today for a deal that's going to happen way down the road. The two big ones here are forwards and futures. And honestly, the best way to get your head around them is with an analogy. A forward contract, that's like going to a tailor and getting a custom suit made. You and the tailor agree on everything: the fabric, the exact measurements, when it'll be ready. It's a one-on-one deal. A futures contract, on the other hand, is like buying that same suit but off the rack at a huge department store. It only comes in standard sizes with standard terms. And this table right here, it just lays out those differences perfectly. See, forwards are traded over the counter, or OTC. That just means they're private deals between two parties. And that customization is nice for sure, but it has one massive, glaring risk, and you can see it right there: counterparty risk. Futures, though, they're traded on big, organized exchanges. They're super standardized. And this is the important part: they use a really clever trick to pretty much get rid of that risk entirely. So, what is this counterparty risk I keep talking about? Well, it sounds fancy, but it's actually a really simple and kind of terrifying idea. It's the chance that the person you made a deal with just flakes. Maybe they go bankrupt, maybe they just decide not to pay up. In a private forward contract, if that happens, you're just left holding the bag. And this is where the futures market is just genius. This thing called a central counterparty, or CCP, jumps into the middle of every single trade. It becomes the buyer to every seller and the seller to every buyer. It's like a universal middleman. By guaranteeing the whole transaction, the CCP is basically an insurance policy for the entire market, making sure everything runs like clockwork and no one gets burned. Now, the key thing to remember with both futures and forwards is that the risk is perfectly symmetric. I mean, picture a seesaw. For every single dollar one person makes, the other person has to lose a dollar. It's a total zero-sum game. And that means the potential for profits and for losses is pretty much unlimited for both people. But what if you don't want a rigid obligation? What if what you really want is a choice? Well, that brings us to our second toolkit, and it's a totally different way of thinking about risk. So let's talk about options. See, with an option, you get the right, but, and this is crucial, not the obligation, to buy or sell something later on. And to get that amazing flexibility, that power to choose, you have to pay a little something up front, and that fee is called the premium. This right here, this is the secret sauce, the one thing that makes options fundamentally different from futures. So there are two basic flavors of options. The first is a call option. When you buy a call, you get the right to buy something at a price you lock in today. It's kind of like putting a non-refundable deposit on a hot concert ticket. You get the right to buy that ticket at its face value later, which is amazing if the show sells out and scalpers are charging a fortune. You use calls when you're bullish, when you think the price of something is going to go way up. On the flip side, we have a put option. This gives you the right to sell an asset at a locked-in price. This is a lot like buying insurance for your car or your house. If the value of your asset suddenly crashes, your put option lets you sell it at that higher pre-agreed price, which saves you from a huge loss. So you use puts when you're bearish, when you think the price is headed down. Now, remember that straight seesaw-like line for a futures contract? Well, for options, you can just throw that idea out the window. The payoff diagram for buying an option looks completely different. It has this really unique shape that everyone in finance calls the hockey stick. It's kind of flat for a while, and then bam, it shoots straight up or down.
That shape is the perfect picture of what we call asymmetry. Okay, and this gets to the very heart of why options are such a powerful tool. When you buy an option, the absolute most you can ever lose is the premium you paid at the beginning. That's it. Your risk is capped. It's defined from the moment you make the trade. But your potential profit, well, that is theoretically unlimited. Your risk is known, but your reward is wide open. This asymmetric payoff is a total game changer. All right, so we have our two different toolkits, right? We've got the obligations, like futures, and we've got the rights, like options. So how do you know which one to pick? Well, it all comes down to what you're trying to do. Are you playing defense, just trying to protect your business? Or are you playing offense, trying to make a big leveraged bet? First, let's talk about playing defense. In finance, we call this hedging, and it's all about using these tools to create some stability and get rid of risk for a business that you're already running. Let's circle all the way back to our airline. To hedge its fuel costs, what it's going to do is buy oil futures contracts. This locks in a price for all the jet fuel it's going to need for the whole next year. Boom. Absolute price certainty. Now, sure, if fuel prices happen to fall, they miss out on those savings. But if prices double, they are completely safe. They've chosen certainty over a potential opportunity. But what if you want to protect yourself and keep your potential upside? Have your cake and eat it too? That's where options are perfect. Imagine an investor who's made a ton of money on a particular stock. They're getting nervous about a crash, so they buy a put option. This acts just like portfolio insurance. If the market tanks, the put option protects their downside. But if the stock keeps climbing, they still get to enjoy all of those future gains, minus the small cost of that premium. Now for the offense, speculation. This is totally different. It's not about protecting a business you have. It's about using a small amount of money to make a big bet on which way you think the market is about to move. And for this, options are a speculator's dream. Let's say a trader thinks a stock is about to take off. They can buy a call option. For a pretty small premium, they get to control a huge amount of stock. If they're right, their profits can be absolutely massive. And if they're wrong, well, the most they can possibly lose is that little premium they paid in the first place. It's a high-stakes bet with a built-in safety net. So let's bring it all home, especially if you're getting ready for those big finance or consulting interviews. We're going to boil all this down into a really simple, powerful prep kit. This will make sure you absolutely nail these topics when they come up. Okay, if you remember nothing else from this, remember these 3 key takeaways. Number 1, forwards and futures create an obligation. Their risk is symmetric, a zero-sum game. Number 2, options give you a right, not an obligation. Their risk is asymmetric, and you have to pay a premium for that choice. And number 3, your goal determines your tool. You want absolute certainty? Use futures. You want to protect yourself but keep your upside? Use options. Now, let's just run through a couple of practice questions. These are the kinds of things you're going to hear. Explain the difference between forwards and futures. Easy. You'll talk about standardization and that all-important CCP. What's the main advantage of an option for a speculator? You'll talk about that beautiful asymmetric risk and having a limited loss. Describe a hedging scenario. You've got the airline example in your back pocket. See? You're ready for these. So there you have it. We have just walked through the entire architecture of how risk is managed in the modern economy. From farmers to global airlines to everyday investors, these tools are absolutely fundamental. So the last question is really for you. Now that you understand the playbook, which risk in your own world or the world you see around you would you want to manage first?